Shion, Oshikoshu, Shidale na Ale Chunale Ugunwiyu he Shudali the Gaye Shatan Takutan, Uhiki Chike San, Ugunwiyu he Kalokoki the Gaye Shatan, Udek na Kalanquoto ti, Unekwa, Unekla na I'm back like I left something. Now I thought about titling this series because before I was discussing, polydactyly, and I said one day I was, freestyling, and I thought of a word, polydactylmentary. I thought that was kind of clever, but then I also was like, as you know, I love, freaking these words, man. I'm talking about as a, linguist. I was like, nah, you know what? Sextacephalic also hits the bullseye. So you understand me? We gonna rock with both. That's what we gonna do. We gonna rock with both. But yeah, so commencing forward, discussing this sextacephalic and polydactylmentary. We left off, well, in my last video, I ended it basically stressing a point that in our earlier inceptions, we were giant insectoid-like beings, right? And that in our earliest forms, we were primordial monsters with numerous amounts of limbs and, heads and, yeah. But, we, gotta crawl before we walk. So, I'm starting with the, one-headed giants, right? Then we move to the two-headed giants, right? Which in medical science will be called bicephali, right? And, the three-headed giants will be known as tricephali. The four-headed giants will be quadricephali. The five-headed giants would be pentacephali. Peep the digits in the hypothetical drawing. The six-headed giants will be sextacephali. The seven-headed giants would be known as septacephali. The eight-headed giants will be known as octocephali. The nine-headed giants will be known as noonacephali. The 10-headed giants will be known as the decicephali. And listen, after pentacephali, there's no Googleable word for a six-headed giant in terms of the cephali being used on it. I had to literally coin all these terms because Google couldn't keep up with me, right? AI is not, I'm feeding AI. Right? Anyway, back to the lecture at hand. So where was I at? Decicephali, right? 10 heads, which reminds me of one of the most renowned mythological figures in Sanatana Dharma, aka Hinduism culture, Lord Ravana, a giant that had 10 heads. Very interesting. From a yogic perspective, one would ask, what does the 10 heads represent? Some think they're just metaphorical representation of the 10 bad qualities known as dashahara that Ravana had that one is supposed to remove. And these 10 negative qualities are pride, greed, anger, lust, attachment, jealousy, injustice, ego, selfishness, and cruelty. Now, to be honest, I don't like the arrangement that was put because this is a random microwave Google grab of this dashahara, right? But this right here would be the more accurate, as we know for those that study Sanskrit. Ahamkara means ego. And the ego would be the chief agent for leading into rebirth. Now, what is all this deep spiritual space cadet spooky stuff I'm talking? What am I basically saying? I'm basically saying that when giants come about with multiple heads, it represents multiple egoic agents that the chief ego takes with himself or herself upon rebirth. And those extra qualities, which are likely unfulfilled desires representing what happens in your past life or what you didn't accomplish, you'll take those qualities, and if extreme, and when you're born during the earlier cycles, you can be born into one of these so-called divine bodies. And all those qualities I mentioned will represent and manifest themselves in the physical body. And as usual, there will be a chief head among the heads on these giants that will be the main decision maker. In rare instances, you'll have a split if you have a two-headed giant, but that's to explain some deep karmic science behind the multiple heads. But yeah, Ravana. And some myths say that Ravana, according to Vedic scriptures, Ravana was either born with 10 heads, or Ravana did some serious austerities that allowed him to sprout 10 heads. But according to various sources, Ravana was born with 10 heads. Some legends even go as far to say that when Ravana was doing penance towards Lord Shiva, he cut one of his heads off. Because if you look at his musical instrument he's holding, there's a head attached to it. All right? But nonetheless, we're dealing with a 10-headed giant. And more importantly, if one can survive getting their head cut off, right? Let's put this in mythological context, right? Even though I don't like using the word myth, which comes from the Sanskrit word Mictlantecutli, which means false belief. We're not teaching false beliefs, right? The people really believe these stories, right? But dealing with Ravana, if he can cut his head off and survive, it's a high probability he didn't live on the earth plane that we know and that we're on now, but on another entire higher plane in a more divine body that can allow him to stay alive and get his head restored while doing his spiritual penance, right? So that should put in context to a lot of these giants with these multiple heads, because honestly, there is a max out limit on the amount of heads one can have while being in a certain body during particular time periods. That kind of was compacted there, but to simply put it, the more heads you have, the more giant of a body you have to have. And so as you live with these particular bodies that are giant, if the environment doesn't accommodate it, if the gravity, the time period, the trees, the food, the body won't be able to sustain it. So this is to say that there is a limit, depending on the yugas, on the birth of the heads in terms of these giants, right? Because we can get into some monster giants like Hecatoncheires, right? All right, the 100-handed ones, right? This giant had 50 heads and 100 arms, right? That already just sounds like unbelievable. And look, it even get more crazier, right? Because I was just talking about Ravana, but what you know about Ravana's older brother, right? The Sahas Ravana, the 1,000-headed Ravana, right? That whole story crazy, right? Ravana went to Brahmaloka. To make a long story short, he was doing penance. Brahma wasn't really feeling it, so he started chopping off all his heads. and he chopped off all 999 heads, and right before he got to the last head, Brahma stopped him. I'm gonna go deeper on another video explaining that. But when discussing these giants, a lot of people don't even know, right, that the very word giant comes from gigantes, right, which literally means earth-born. Yeah, the giants was born from Gaia and Uranus, the sky, right? This is according to what our cosmology say, right? So all that Anunnaki space stuff, you know. Anyways, they're born from the earth. That's why they're called the giants. And speaking of the giants, remember the very word giant is saying Gaia, like it's in the word, right? Interestingly, there's another variant of these beings known as giants called Gaganes, right? Means what? Earthborn. And they were a race of 6-armed giants. I'm gonna bring that up to segue in my claim, right, regarding in modern man. I have to be careful. I got to be careful as I explain this stuff. Basically, the first created beings were documented having 6 heads and 6 limbs on both sides. Let me verify that, because we're doing chronology, right? And we're dealing with the giants born from Earth. Well, let's see who the first beings were, the first twins. In the Sanatana Dharma culture, the first beings were known as Yama and Yami. Yama literally means twins, right? And according to Vedic scripture, they were the first 2 humans. Okay? Now, these humans were born as twins, right? Yama and Yami are the twins. Yama means twins. Now, out of these twins, according to Vedic scriptures, Yama was considered the first mortal who died and espied the way to the celestial abodes. Okay? And this is why he judges the souls of the dead, and depending on their deeds, assigns them to the realms of the Pitris, right? Forefathers, Naraka, hell, or to be reborn on earth. So this is literally, right, the being that judges all of the souls, right, that goes into the subterranean realms, because Yama was the first being to die, right? We're talking about the first humans, right? This is on some Adam and Eve, sugar, honey, iced tea stuff, right? And I'm saying that for a reason, because I'm emphasizing key points for people to remember, right, in regards to the storylines behind the deities, so I can show which other deities they are by philology association, right? Because I study the myths, I study the languages, and I can connect who the deities are in other cultures, which gives us a more broader spectrum on what we're talking about. But back to Lord Yama, right, who was a twin, right? And he died first, became the ruler of the underworld. What am I arguing technically? Lord Yama is technically Maat in the Kemetic culture, right? This is why when you read about Lord Yama, he's capturing souls using the noose, which is technically the Ankh, right? I just cracked the code on, right, what the Ankh actually is. But we're here to talk about limbs. We're here to talk about the first humans, right, who were known as Yama and Yami. So let's validate this even further. Who is Yama in Buddhism, right? And the answer is Yamantaka. Yeah, the 6-headed deity I was posting in the background before I got to this point. Yeah, that was the deity. Yamantaka was said to have 6 legs, 6 faces, in 6 arms, riding the same water buffalo, mirroring Yama, right? Because, according to the legend, Yamantaka is a wrathful expression of Manjushri, right? Some of the schools will argue it's an emanation of Amitabha, but allegedly, Yamantaka adopted this form in order to defeat Yama, the Lord of Death, who was arrogantly interfering with karma by claiming victims before their time was up. Yamantaka submitted Yama by terrorizing him with his form, one even more frightening than that of Yama himself, which at the time also acted as a mirror of Yama's horrible appearance. See, so he was mirroring, right? See Manjushri's face at top? He was mirroring what Lord Yama looked like, right? And your Lord Yama had 6 heads, right? And let's further confirm this, right? Let's do this philology work, right? Let's further confirm who Lord Yama is, right? As the first created beings, right? In other cultures, having the 6 heads, 6 arms and legs and stuff. Well, when we study Norse mythology, there's a being known as Ymir. Sounds very close to Yama. Sounds like a variant of it. Ymir, also known as Orgamir. Ymir, as a primeval being, was born from adder, yeastly venom that dripped from the icy rivers called the Uyaga, and lived in the grassless void of Ginnunga Gap. Ladies and gentlemen, Ginnunga Gap is the yawning void. That is the lowest of the underworld. Here we have a being known as Ymir, paralleling Yama, being born from the underworld. Here, let's read further. Ymir, or Orgamir, in Norse mythology, the first being, a giant who was created from the drops of water that formed when the ice of Niflheim met the heat of Muspelheim. Ladies and gentlemen, Niflheim is what I argue the origins of Nephilim in the Bible. Yes, the whole concept of Nephilim was derived from Norse mythology, especially if we're dealing with the Germanic translations of the Bible, right? But getting back to our point, dealing with Norse mythology, this being known as Ymir, or Orgamir, was the first. He was the father of all the giants. A male and a female grew under his arms, and his legs produced a 6-headed son. And to me, what's more mind-blowing is the fact that I'm seeing constant parallels of underworld deities associated with the first humans. That's like completely contrary to what we're told in our modern religions. But yeah, the underworld associated deities, they're either recorded as the first human beings, or they are directly associated with creating the first human beings. Take the Nawa mythology, for example, regarding Mictēcacihuātl, Lady of Death, is the consort to Mictlantecutli. And in this story, they are seeking bones to create humanity. Again, in fact, they use the bones of the more ancient ancestors to construct humanity from it. And again, now let's zoom in on this same underworld deity known as paronymy here. I'm gonna show a paronymous relationship here, right? But you know, because lookership is hookership. You ain't dig me, ski. But yeah, is this a coincidence? Right? We're dealing with the Lord of the Underworld in the Nawa cosmology, in the Aztec cosmology, right? Here in the Sanatana Dharma Hindu culture and in the Buddhist culture, we have descriptions of 6 heads being on the foremost ancestor, right? Dealing with the ancestors that came from the underworld, right? That used the bones from our ancestors to create the first humans. They're depicted with 6 principal heads. This is like not a coinky dink. It's actually mind-blowing. I didn't think, upon researching the ancestors of the dead, or the first ancestors among the Aztec culture, that I was gonna see 6 being associated on the heads after I was going deep into the Sanatana Dharma and the Buddhism. But it doesn't stop there, right? Because we're talking about Lord Yama, right? So let's dig in. There's something known as Yama Yami, right? Which is celebrated during the month of Kartik. Look at the dates. Happy Halloween, y'all. Yes, in Sanatana Dharma culture, they celebrate Yama. They worship Yama during Yama Dipam, and it occurs during Halloween time, around October to November, right? But when we dig deeper into Kartika Dipam, we learn that, well, the festival is celebrated on the first full moon day of the month of Kartika, coinciding with Kritika Nakshatra. Again, in Shaivism, this is also celebrated to commemorate the origin of Kartikeya. Kritika, Kartikeya. Let's see what Kartikeya looks like. A 6-headed deity. That's crazy. In fact, Kritika was known as the 6 Kritikas, who raised the Hindu god Kartikeya, which were Shiva, Sambhuti, Priti, Sanati, Anasuya, and Sama. Oh, we got the names. But what's more interesting is this Pleiades association. Why? Well, according to world myths, right? That's where the 6-headed giant ancestor went. So I can point to the sky and say he still exists, he's real. But more deeply, the lesson in this video is teaching us that the ancestors of the dead, the first beings to die, the Lord of the Underworld, that we later knew as the devil, is our creator. That's the mind-blowing part. A 6-headed giant creator, a race of them. They have lineages. But I'm gonna show something even more amazing. In my next video, I'm gonna go into who Maat is in the Chalaki culture. Yes, Charaki. Yeah. And I'm going to do a lot of philology with the Aboriginals and Cherokee. In fact, I'm going to show the Dreamtime word in our language. But until then, do da go ha e, di dioli ha, dunkalanish ga.